Hey guys, and welcome to the Invar Technologies Podcast, a podcast where we interview top-level executives inside leading and growing companies in the food and beverage space. We're excited to have our guest today, Brian Lesperance. We'll be diving into a story, a little bit about what his company Fenn Valley does, and some engaging insights into the beverage industry. So make sure to stick around. I'll go ahead and just kick it off to you, Brian. If you could just, introduce yourself, tell a quick snippet of your story and your background prior to working at Fenn Valley.
Sure. Thanks for having me. So Fenn Valley is a kind of mid-sized winery in Michigan, located in Southwest Michigan. We've got about 65 employees here. We will make somewhere just south of 100,000 cases of wine in 2024, ranging all the different styles from your sort of classic Bordeaux reds, think Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, that kind of thing, to your pretty traditional white wines, think Chardonnay, Pinot Grigios, Rieslings, and then we also do a lot of other styles of wine, things that are called special naturals, which are like you take a wine base and you add flavorings to it. We do that for regular like wine, low alcohol products, hard cider, and then sort of everything in between. We do over half of our business is actually for other wineries throughout the country. So a lot of our work is sort of as a silent production partner. But we do operate one of the busier tasting rooms in the state of Michigan, right here in our estate in Fennville. We're farmers and winemakers. So we have a 240-acre vineyard here in Southwest Michigan. And then we have a bunch of partner growers that work within the state. So most of our fruit comes from Michigan for our brand, and then for clients it kind of depends on what they want. We bring in wine from other parts of the country if that's what they want or that's where they're from, and so we're very custom in that regard. My role is to kind of head up operations and everything here. I joined the business in 2012, having spent about 10 years in the technology world, actually as a marketing executive at a software company in Michigan. And so my path to winemaking, I guess, is sort of non-traditional, but that's not atypical in our industry. I mean, there are certain degrees for this for sure now, but a lot of folks come at it from real life experience. And it's sort of amazing how many parallels I actually run into, thinking, there can't possibly be anything, that ties, actual software development to winemaking. But there's a surprising number of times where I find that my background was handy for one reason or another.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. It's a very cool, it's always interesting to talk to people within the industry, kind of, how they got, in the wine industry. What was it about, them that got there? And a common theme that I'm seeing is that sometimes it's more of that they don't find the industry, kind of finds them, right? And it kind of almost, it sounds like that maybe happened to in your case. And there is a lot of parallels, right? So to your point, I think that it shows how everything is almost interconnected as well, right? Experience from one thing can apply to any industry that you go to as well. I did want to ask you a little bit in terms of, you said you've kind of been in the wine industry now for the past 10 years, or almost 12 now. You said 2012 is when you joined.
Yep.
What types of trends are you noticing right now within the market, within the wine industry that you're aware of that you'd like to maybe let the audience know about?
There's a lot of stuff. Actually, I'm kind of close to this data right now because I just did a presentation on this at the first ever Michigan Craft Beverage Summit, which actually brought together craft beer, craft spirits, hard cider, and wine. And I actually did kind of a presentation on sort of macro trends using some of the secondary research data out there, but also we surveyed our own customer base, which is we have about 35,000 folks, active folks in our database, and we got about 1,400 responses, so quite a bit. And I was trying to kind of tease out sort of some of the trends, because the macro trends at the high level are great, but when you're a craft producer, sometimes those trends can be a little bit misleading as far as what we're seeing. And so basically what I'm seeing is a couple things. Obviously what we're seeing is the low alcohol kind of movement seems to be plateauing. So, you're seeing the influx of all kinds of beverages in that space. And what I think the consumer is slowly figuring out is that they're not all created equal. In other words, a hard seltzer like product, think like your White Claws or something, that's actually a malt beverage base. It's not a wine, a light wine or something like that. Which is fine, but it's just about kind of knowing what you're consuming. And so that, trend wise, we're seeing that still strong. That segment's strong, but it's plateauing for sure. The palate of the typical consumer seems to be drying out. In other words, we're seeing a migration to drier styles of wine, from the sweeter styles that were more popular maybe 10 or 15 years ago. And then we're also seeing a movement to more, probably more crisp, kind of cleaner, fruit-centric styles. So you're not seeing, while we're still using plenty of oak, don't get me wrong, but we're using it more restrained. So and we're seeing the market really respond to that. Also, just straight up unoaked products, like your unoaked Chardonnays have been outpacing the more traditional style of Chardonnay now for a number of years. And the consumer seems to be really resonating. The last thing I'll say on trends is it seems like the millennials, Gen Y and Gen Xers are a lot more interested in seeking out sort of obscure varietals, things that are less popular for a variety of reasons, and they're less tied to the sort of name brand varietals and producers, and really looking for stuff that's more unique, stuff that's more interesting. At least when they come into a small winery, they really want to see what is different. What can I find that's not what I would just pick up at the grocery store on a typical day.
Definitely, yeah, and it's interesting. It's as you're speaking, I'm thinking about how much we change as a society, and it kind of, obviously we'll always move in that direction where nothing ever stays the same, right? I was talking with someone else they were a whiskey manufacturer, and they have their own company. They were talking about looking at some of the macro trends in terms of how much the new generation is drinking compared to the previous generation. And I think millennials and Gen Z are now consuming less alcohol comparative to the baby boomers and different generations above them. So it's always interesting to see kind of how things change. And to your point, even like tastes change, right? Like what's what are the consumers more likely to indulge in now? I think it's quite fascinating. Having the data, I think, and looking at that is also, to me, I'm a geek about data, so I can always like that stuff, and I'm sure you being an operation guy, you like data as well. So
yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So you already talked a little bit about what Fenn Valley is doing and kind of the products that you guys are offering. I'm curious to get your perspective though. What do you think really your products or unique value really come from the products that you guys offer to your consumers?
Well, Michigan is a really great growing climate for a lot of perennial fruits. So we grow in this area along the lakeshore, everything that it's one of the most diverse agricultural areas outside of California. The Lake Michigan gives us this huge kind of heat sink, so it helps make our climate more temperate. So our winters are less harsh, our summers are a little bit milder, our growing season's quite a bit longer than elsewhere in the Midwest. So, and because we're so close to the lake, we get really good kind of cool evenings and sort of temperate days. So the vines really develop a lot of flavor early in their ripeness. And so what you get from a lot of wines from our region is going to be a lot of what we call varietal character. In other words, the Chardonnay, you're really tasting Chardonnay. And that is again related most directly to the microclimate that we're in here. and the types of grapes that we're planting. So a lot of folks that come to our tasting room, are that's the one thing that they sort of seems to resonate with them. They're like, wow, really tastes different than I'm used to experiencing with a Riesling or a Chardonnay or something. So we're seeing, that's something that we offer that's somewhat, I think, unique to a cooler climate like we have here in Michigan. The other thing that we're doing a lot of, we've been on kind of the forefront of this, is the use of what are called non-Saccharomyces yeast. So Saccharomyces cerevisiae is kind of the yeast strain that's been used for commercial winemaking forever. It's considered brewer's yeast, sort of colloquially, and there's a lot of different strains of it. Just like there's a lot of different breeds of dogs. They're the same genus species, but they have very different characteristics. And so yeasts that have been either native yeast, which is used a lot in winemaking, or highly cultured yeasts that are used in winemaking, both can bring different things to the table. But one of the things they all bring is that they convert sugars into alcohol. And that's how we, of course, make wine. But there's this other type of yeast that is, again, kind of bracketed into this sort of bucket of non-Saccharomyces, which basically means that they produce little to no alcohol, but they do other stuff. And this has been really kind of cutting edge technology in our industry. So what's the other stuff that they do? And why on earth would you use them if they're not making booze as part of their metabolic pathway? Well, the one thing they do is they will outcompete things that can hurt wine. So they outcompete spoilage organisms in a more natural way, thus allowing us to use less sterilizing chemical like sulfur dioxide or other things that you're using to try to beat back some of the bacteria and yeast that are bad for winemaking. So that's one of the big reasons why they're used a lot in red winemaking, especially because reds, they tend to come later in the season where it's colder out. So the yeast that we want to do its job may take longer to get going, and so bad things can happen. The other thing that these newer classes of yeast that aren't designed to make alcohol are doing is providing oftentimes a lot of structure to the wine, which we define in sort of the sensory experience as the mid palate. So basically that weight of the wine on your tongue and your mouth as you're tasting it, adding that structure, especially to white wines that don't see oak. That's, again, it's kind of coupled with this other trend of less oak driven winemaking. One of the things that barrels do is give you that structure. And so to kind of get that structure back, you can do it through these yeast selections that can really drive in a lot of that body that is lacking in a wine that doesn't see extended barrel time. So they're just some of the things that we're kind of working with here that are somewhat unique still, and kind of on the front edge of our industry.
Yeah, I was thinking as you were talking, it must be, I don't know if were you a wine connoisseur before you kind of stepped into the wine world? Did you always like wine, or was it you grew into it as you kind of started working more?
It's a little bit of both. I always liked wine. I took a couple classes in college even on it, but it wasn't necessarily to get in the business, just because I was curious. I like to travel to wine regions. I enjoyed going to tasting rooms, but once, it's amazing how much I thought I knew until I started here within the first
exactly
week
what I
of,
was going to say.
yeah,
So,
drinking from the fire hose. Yeah.
That's completely changed, right?
Yeah, for sure.
After developing so much wine and being inside that process, I'm sure now it's when you taste something, it's you're looking for something more, like you're developing a palate, right? Because that's essentially what it is, and understanding the flavor combinations. I mean, I'm not the biggest wine connoisseur, but my family's Italian, so I've indulged in we definitely like to try some wines.
Yeah.
There's people who they just know their wine, right? And then being able to understand the types of scents that are coming, the body of it, and you just talking about it, just I can tell. I'm like, okay, he definitely knows his stuff. So it makes me think now when you drink wine, you're probably also obsessed with always trying to figure out the flavor from the different flavor profiles as well, right?
Yeah, I definitely sucked a lot of the fun right out of it, and as far as turning this into a job, but it's still a lot of fun. That's every year is different. Every vintage is different. We're working with new, it's one thing, because I made beer at home when I was in college too, and this was a long time ago, but beer, and I meet with a lot of commercial brewers and such now in my travels, and if you get a beer that hits with the market, your objective is to replicate that thing, to your grain bill will be the same. You want everything to be the same, including your water, which is a huge part of beer, right? It's just the water. So if it's some secret sauce of your local water, or it's not, like you're doing a reverse osmosis filtration to take water completely out of the equation, whatever it is, you're trying to get the same precision recipe every single time. Or if you're making a change, it's very intentional. Markets, places telling us this, so we're going to try to do it. We don't even have that luxury in winemaking, and it's sort of a blessing and a curse. We can't make the same Merlot 2 years in a row. It's just impossible. The fruit's different. We don't have the levers to pull to do that. So we're trying to be stylistically similar in theory, so that if you come to our tasting room and you liked our Merlot last year, you don't have to try it again this year. You can try something else, and you can kind of trust us that this year's Merlot is going to be stylistically similar to the one that you liked from the year before, but they're never going to be the same. And that's
Wow.
it's just not our goal. It's just not even a realistic option. So what we end up doing is, change is slow in the wine world because you get one shot a year, and if you want to, try something, if you want to do a pilot, a lot of times we'll do it in like 5-gallon increments because we want to test 3 different yeasts that year. I don't want to wait 3 years to do a yeast trial. So I'll do 5-gallon batches, kind of like the old days of making wine in college kind of a thing, just to see if you can notice any differences without having to wait, all that time. So it's one thing where, we are innovating a lot, but we're also in an industry that lend itself to rapid innovation on a large scale.
Yeah, and that's a great perspective. Never thought about it from comparing the two, beer and wine, the differences between the two. Obviously you come from a technology background, or working at a technology company. So I wanted to get your opinion on this because I'm assuming you have your hands on a lot of technology that's intertwined with the operational side of things. What do you see are some of the biggest challenges in relationship to technology inside the wine industry from being in it a while now?
There's 2 areas that we use technology in terms of actual software. I guess let's just look at it from that point of view. One is in the production system, whether it's inventory management, winemaking, accounting, that kind of stuff. And that's usually some combination of highly specialized production software trying to merge it with more traditional accounting stuff. That can be difficult because we are a niche industry. There's not, and winemaking production itself has certain requirements for government reporting and things that make it different than if you're making widgets. So you can't just pick any kind of like an enterprise like ERP system to manage production. You can't necessarily use just an out of the box solution, but your accounting is the same. So you're trying to kind of merge those together to make as little duplication of data entry and tracking as possible. So that's one area that we definitely struggle with, especially as a smaller. We're big enough to need those tools, but we're not so big to just go have something made custom for us. If you're a huge winery, you build custom middleware that connects your accounting to your production software, and that's what you do. And if you're super little, you probably can do it on a spreadsheet or even a legal pad. But we're right somewhere in the middle of that, where we need tools, but we can't pay for them to be fully custom. So we found that we have to kind of work around the tools often to kind of build a workflow that can take advantage of what's already been built, but yet maintain what is special about and unique about our situation. The other side is from a customer perspective in terms of things like point of sale, customer relationship management stuff. So you can kind of figure, okay, what are people buying? What are they not buying? How do they sign up for tours and events and things where we have bookable experiences? Even our tastings are frequently booked ahead of time online, managing all that stuff so that the customer has a good experience from the time that they hit our website until the time that they hopefully walk out of our tasting room with some wine. We want to make that experience as seamless as possible. Since we are competing for people's leisure time and their disposable income, we have to be very, I think we have to be very cognizant of the fact that their patience is somewhat limited. Your free time is your most valuable resource, and so we don't want them to be wasting a lot of that trying to figure out how to book a tour, to come here and visit. We want to make that as easy as we can. So those are some of the areas where direct software and services are something that we work with on a daily basis, and we've seen a lot of change. I mean, it's been better than ever for sure. Things have been improving, and the best thing I look at is whether it's a customer or whether it's a staff member. I want the technology to be working such that they don't have to think about it. If it's our staff, they're thinking about making wine. If they're down in production, they're not thinking about the computer system trying to wrestle with it. And if they're our tasting room employee, they're thinking about that customer, coming in to buy wine. The technology is helping support that experience. It's not getting in the way of them focusing on the customer.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And I think it's important to have a leader like that within the organization that's able to kind of see that eagle-eyed view and understand how technology should be used and implemented within the organization. So I guess a follow-up to that, what type of mindset would you really say is needed to be, a successful, VP of operations within a company?
This is where it's super similar to my background in technology, in your software role. It's just all about the customer. You have to be willing to listen a lot to what the market's telling you about what you're doing. You have to be open to that feedback. You got to be creating systems to gather that feedback, and a lot of times that's just through direct customer interaction, but it's, through surveys, through whatever you can do to better understand what your customer is actually thinking, and then trying to align what you're building with what they want. That's the name of the game. But it starts really with making sure that customer is at the center of what you do. And for us, it's we have two distinctly different customers. We have the ones who walk in the door, the winery, looking to buy wine or cider or have a good time visiting us on their vacation or something. And that's that direct customer interaction. That's the piece that I was way less familiar with coming into this job. Because this company I worked for before was all business to business. So then our other type of customer is business to business. It's a brewery that we make wine for. It's a big winery on the East Coast that we do a product for something like that. And so with those folks, you're listening, but you're also trying to tease out what they really want, because they're listening into their customers too. So it's like it could be a game of telephone if you're not careful, because they often do look to us for advice on a particular decision related to the products that we're making for them. And we always want to be careful that we're not doing that with the wrong lens in. If their client is way different than ours, then we need to know that if we're going to offer them any advice. So again, it all kind of comes back to just really being customer centric, coming to work every day, and knowing that you're the people walking in the door are the ones paying the bills. So we got to be cognizant of what we can do for them. And like I said, on one hand, you think, okay, they're on vacation. They should be pretty darn relaxed if they walk in the tasting room. But on the other hand, we all know how valuable that time is. That's their time to be not at work or not doing whatever else they're doing. And so, I try to take that real seriously, and like I said, everything we do is to really respect that time is the one thing you can't make more of, and they're giving us a little bit of that. We should do our best to make sure we're meeting or exceeding, hopefully, their expectations there.
That is a great point. I think it's so important for businesses to really put their customers first, right? And it's cliche to say, but it's so true. And my family owns some restaurants, and so I come from a background of working within the customer service industry, understanding how it is to be customer centric. And I've taken that, on to other places in my life where I went, because I've seen how valuable that is, right? And I think it's important to have that at the forefront of your mind and always be putting attention towards that, because at the end of the day, your customers are what make your business, right? Like if you don't have customers, you have no business, right? The business doesn't operate with that. So
to your point, it is cliche, like you said, but it's hard to do. It's always easy to say. It's really hard to do on a daily basis.
Yeah. And especially if you start to grow, right? Like I think that's the biggest thing, is trying to make sure that everything doesn't fall apart as you're doing more and more. You want to make sure you're still giving that, attention that's needed to prioritize the customer experience.
Right.
I don't like to go too far out in terms of goals or like 5 to 10 years because it's kind of hard to see that far. But in the next 12 months, what's the vision for Fenn Valley? What are you guys kind of working towards or building towards?
So we got a couple things that we're working on right now that are sort of interesting. Not that they're, wine again has been around for a long time, so we're not reinventing the wheel there. But
Hmm.
from a product perspective, we have been looking at planting some Pinot Noir here, which has been a grape that we've kind of struggled with in the past. We had a pretty big vineyard here that just wasn't performing well, and we took it out in 2012, right as I got here, actually. And we're kind of scorned from that experience, but we know the consumer loves it, and the grape likes to grow here. We just think we had the wrong site, wrong clone, maybe the technology in the vineyard wasn't quite right for it. And so we've been really taking a much more surgical approach to putting in some more of that grape, because we know the market loves it. But if you can only make a good one every 4 years or something, it just doesn't make any sense. So from a production perspective, we've been busy with that, looking at some clones that we think will do better in our climate, looking at how we put the trellis together to make sure that we give the trellis is the system that basically the vines grow into, and trying to kind of structure that to give them the best chance of success. So that's been kind of what we've been working on the production side. On kind of the retail customer facing side, we're continuing to look at ways to offer more, again, more bookable experiences, more things people can sign up for in advance that really bring them into the vineyards, because that's our unique thing. So when people come here, we want them to get out and see the farm, because that's, again, you can go to a bar, you can go to a restaurant and get a glass of wine. If you come here, you're hopefully going to be seeing how grapes are grown, how they're made. And so we've got different ways you can book private things out in the vineyard, for example, different ways to offer tours and tastings that just give people more exposure to how wine is made, kind of demystify the process as much as we can.
Definitely. Well, it sounds exciting, man. I definitely have to try out that Pinot Noir when you guys get that up and going, because I'm
be a few years. It takes a while, but we're on
I'll be waiting. I'll be waiting. I'm always the Pinot Noir and Malbec are usually two of my favorites. Yeah. Merlot's good too. Yeah, Merlot's always a good nice, in between wine. I feel like I'm not the connoisseur, like I said. I'm not the connoisseur, but I'll try a couple here and there.
There you go.
Yeah. Well, Brian, it's been an absolute pleasure getting a chance to talk to you, man, and hear a little bit more about your story and kind of what you guys are doing over that Fenn Valley. I definitely think it's something, really unique, and I like your approach towards it. I like the passion. So definitely we'll have to try out some products soon. But in terms of, I always like to kind of end with a final question that's a little bit loaded, so be prepared. But
okay,
in terms of being inside different industries, throughout your career, and learning some different lessons along the way, if you kind of maybe had to summarize, one or two of the most important things that you've learned in your career that you'd be willing to share with the audience, what would those be?
That is a loaded question, boy.
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing for me, and again, I've kind of reinvented my career about a third of the way through. I guess we'll see how long I go, but it's just to keep learning, to just be open to all kinds of different stuff that you might learn along the way that you didn't think that you would be interested in. Like for an example, in software engineering, I had no idea how a pump works, a liquid pump. And now I could take one apart and put it back together again. Not my day job right now, but it's been so interesting to be exposed to more physical stuff, because my world was all bits and bytes before. And that's just one example, but just the idea that, when you go to school, you're basically learning how to learn. And then if you can take that framework and apply it to life, and just find something that you like, because it's a heck of a lot easier to stay motivated to learn if you actually like what you're doing. Because I just find every day, I'm the days go the fastest if I'm like in a project where I'm just learning along the way, and so that to me has been the thing that keeps me up in the morning. is just that piece of it. So that was probably the big, and then the other lesson I learned, because I was a marketer too, in software, that was kind of my area, was business development, product management kind of stuff. You make the first, technology thing. Back in the day, we were actually shipping CDs, but nowadays it's of course not that way. But there's unlimited supply, right? So you build something and you try to sell as much of it as you can. Well, that doesn't work in winemaking because you can run out pretty easy. So I had to really learn that there's about supply side constraints, and I feel like that as a marketer is something that was a huge lesson for me, sort of in that midpoint of my career. It was like starting over in a lot of ways, that you could actually run out of something that you were trying to sell.
Yeah, not as scalable, right? It's a little bit harder. Software's a
A
little
lot
easier.
different strategy for sure,
Yeah,
for
yeah,
sure.
yeah, yeah. Well, that's awesome, and I completely agree. I think that it's so important to have that mindset when you're looking at learning, and I always say always be learning, right? There's always something more to learn. You can never, the moment that you think you know enough is the moment where you're going to really lose in life. I feel like you have to continue to have that approach where it's like, how can I learn more? What can I do better? How can I improve? And you almost have to get addicted to that in a way, right? Like, how can I get addicted to just learning and
Yep.
wanting to absorb more knowledge? Because that's, I think, one of the best qualities, from talking to different leaders, to different people across different companies. One of the things that they always mention is that, right? Like, there's never enough to learn, and you'll
Yeah.
never have enough time to learn everything, but you always need to have that continuous pursuit of learning. So
Exactly.
love that you mentioned that. But hey, man, if people are listening to this and they want to either check out, yourself or the company, what are the best ways to go ahead and do that?
The easiest way is just on our website. So fennvalley.com is definitely the easiest way to see what we're up to, book experiences, learn about wine, buy wine to ship to your house. All the things that we're up to are pretty well documented there.
Awesome. Well, I'll make sure to include that in the description. Thanks again, Brian,
Okay.
for coming on. And if you guys did make it all the way to the end, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more content. And we hope you guys have a great rest of your day. Thanks again, Brian. Take care.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Appreciate it.